Okay, everyone, this is Ted Finch, and we are going to be discussing how to position your product and deposition or crush the competition. A couple things we're going to be talking about is I'll explain a little bit about my background. Some of the main takeaways from this is why you must position yourself, the company positioning, the product positioning, creative examples. I've got a lot of case studies, different tools that I'll introduce on how to position, and then the final deliverable, which is you're going to be able to answer this question: why I would be a fool not to consider your product. So we have a lot of material that I'm going to be covering. So let's get going. One note, these slides have a lot of density. I'll send these slides to you afterwards if you want to go through these slides with other people in your department that weren't able to attend the webinar. Whether this records is whether or not my video recording capturing is working right now. But otherwise, there's a lot of density in the material so that you can just pretty much read through a lot of the material. Even though there is that much density, it's still probably about half of what I'm actually going to be covering. So prepare for high-speed delivery. Hopefully you won't be bored. Usually most people aren't. They usually ask me to slow down, but too bad. I'm going to go fast anyway. Watch the video afterwards. Okay, my background. I've had Chanimal.com for over 17 years now. I actually started that first as a collaboration site. Most people in the industry know me because I was a vice president for a company that did product launches, and we launched over 400 products for it says here 150 companies, but it's actually more than 200 companies, including 15 divisions of Microsoft, HP, WordPerfect, Ashton Tate, the old days, right up through Creative Labs when they had 3 people. And of course, then later I wrote the marketing plan, published Netscape Navigator, helped form Red Storm Entertainment with Tom Clancy, and I was a VP at Goldmine. Also VP of Marketing at $4 billion Harcourt. Most people know of SeaWorld, Neiman Marcus. Senior VP at $33 billion Motorola. Sat on the marketing board, and I was actually over strategy, which is one of the things we're talking about right now. So I've gone through this material a lot. We had over 400 people just in the semiconductor sector alone that I worked with. And then a VP at $130 billion GE. So the main thing, I'm just pointing this out, is that, yeah, I've done this stuff a lot. It works. And now I'll show you why it works. Here's some of the companies that I've worked with on a consulting basis, and some of these I actually worked in the companies themselves. Okay, let's talk about positioning. Okay, first of all, it is the apex of all strategy. So it really answers that question: why would anyone want to buy us? And I say us because they usually have to buy the institution, the company, first. If your company has a bad reputation, then you've got a problem, no matter how good your product is. Also, it's best to launch your product, if you position your product beforehand. But unfortunately, that's usually not the case. Most of the time when people call me up is because they've got a product that's not selling and they need help. So I call this reality therapy, sort of the old days when I took one psychology class. Reality is essentially that's what it is. Deal with it, move forward, market it, or sell it anyway. And that's what I'm going to show you. Okay, the positioning within a company, the product, it answers that question within a company: who you are, what's unique, what do you guys do? For example, here's a test. One company that I was helping with was Penviva. And unfortunately, Penviva, it was a very unique company name, but it was also their product name. And because it was so unique, people had no idea what it was. It wasn't descriptive. But the key is that certainly a lot of times if your company name is not descriptive, that's one thing. Your product name is a different issue. That's something that I get in when I talk about branding and naming conventions. But the key is within your elevator speech, you should be able to explain who your company is, what your value proposition is. That's if you're a VP CEO level. But certainly from a product level, you need to be able to answer that question: why I need to buy your product, or certainly at least consider it, within the first 30 seconds. Most people don't have that down because most marketing departments that I've seen don't have that down. Okay, so within the company positioning, the issue here is what promises do prospects expect from a company like yours? And then the next part is which of those promises can you keep? Sometimes you can't keep it. The old adage, I'd like it fast, I'd like it done well, and I'd like it cheap. And the rule is pick any two. So you can't always keep every promise. The key is finding out what areas that the prospects value most from your company, and then keep those promises, and then aim the entire company around it. Okay, the other issue over here is company or product taglines. So sometimes you will get that positioning out within your tagline or even within your product tagline. So most products that I see have taglines. Same with companies. Like Microsoft used to have a tagline, "Where do you want to be today?" But it sounded almost like they were monopolistic, which when they got sued for being a monopoly, then they changed that title to something different. By the way, that's my life goal, and that is to actually be sued by the government for having a monopoly because I've done my job so well. Okay, in a tagline or positioning statement, there's two elements. There's the descriptor. Let's say it's contact management software. So the descriptor is, a CRM. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, but that has no positioning. Positioning would be something like, are you the #1 best-selling? Are you the #1 most award-winning? Are you the leader? So one is descriptive, one is positioning. And a lot of times when it comes to product, you see a lot of descriptive and then they forget the positioning. So if you're the #1 most award-winning or the #1 bestseller and you don't leverage that positioning, it is a travesty because it has so much value in the market. Okay, the other item over here is if you're associated. For example, I was MetroWorks. MetroWorks, we had a tagline that I created with the company, and it was software starts here. If you knew MetroWorks, it's a software development company, so that makes sense. We made development tools. But once we were acquired by Motorola, well, $33 million equity was better than our $20 million worth of equity. And so we changed it to MetroWorks, a Motorola company, just like Tivoli did. Even though they were about $1 billion in size, when they were acquired by IBM, they called it Tivoli, an IBM company. Okay, so these are just some of the rules. The acid test on this is, are you worth more associated with Motorola or less? So if you're acquired, then you just got to watch out that you don't lose existing equity within that transition. So sometimes you have to create a combination. But the real things I want to talk about is product positioning. Okay, so essentially, how is your product positioned within the field of competitors? If it's a CRM, is it the fastest? Is it the best for selling? Is it the best product for integrating? What makes it unique? What's the unique differentiator? And then I'll give you guys a couple different hooks. Now, it's best in high tech if your name reflects the positioning. So, for example, if you look at QuickBooks from Intuit, it was a quick way to do your books. So essentially, they were keying on that this was easy, this was quick, so the name itself reflected the positioning, if possible. If not, then your tagline has to reflect the positioning. And then when you try to build that out, you may say something, but people, if they have any common sense, they want you to prove it. So give me 3 validation statements to prove it. So I'll give you an example of how this works in just a minute. Okay, but in positioning, it's very interesting because a lot of times the answer is right in front of your eyes. So an assignment from everyone here, this is only PG-13. I don't watch rated R movies. I don't want to watch anything my kids won't watch. But there's a book out there there's a book and then there's also a video called The Legend of Bagger Vance. I recommend that you see it. It's an excellent book on positioning and strategy. Essentially, when he got good enough that he could go down there and see a clear path to the hole, then he pretty much knew his strategy. He had done enough work to get his strategy down. So here's an example. Like I saw Tiger Woods, and the hole was right in front of him, and that guy hit that ball about 45 degrees off to the left. And it curved around and landed in the hole. And I thought, how did he see that? And one of the ways he saw that is he's so experienced, he's so immersed into it that he was able to see it. And so that's the key on strategy, is you have to do your homework, immerse yourself, and when you can hit that ball 45 degrees to the right, I think I just said left, but okay, and it turns and goes in the holes, then you've seen the strategy. So this is the moment when everything comes clear, everything else blurs out, and the path to that hole is self-evident. And so this is the ultimate moment, and it's exciting when it happens, when you realize, oh my goodness, I found the Holy Grail. Or essentially, I found my positioning or my strategy. And I'll give you examples of this within some of the case studies that I'm going to show. So now it's time to show you guys how to not only hurt the competition, not only beat the competition, but how to crush the competition. So here's an example. Here I was. I'll give you that example at MetroWorks. So we had CodeWord for IDE. Now most of our applications dominated the market. 97% of every application for the Macintosh was built on CodeWord. We also dominated on the PlayStation, on several different platforms, and 58 embedded different platforms out there. CodeWord was the dominant player. But on the Windows, we only had 2% market share. So obviously I met with the product manager and said, well, how are we going to increase that market share? And so I said, what makes your product different? So she says, well, we're just like Microsoft. I was like, oh my goodness, kill me now. It's another Me Too product. And so, I probed her further, and she said, well, it's cheaper. Well, price is not a competitive differentiator unless it's part of your business model, like Dell, meaning they handle their product in their warehouse for about 4 hours. HP, it might be sitting from the time that somebody orders it to the time that they can pick it from distribution for 3 to 4 months. So a price advantage for Dell is they can drop the price, and HP can't drop it without losing margin or sometimes even losing money. So that's a differentiator on price. But for software, if your competitor can decide they're going to drop their price to match you in seconds, that's not a strong differentiator. It should take, I typically say, at least 6 months before your competitor can match one of your features that you're using as the prime positioning differentiator. Okay, the real issue with all of this positioning is it wasn't determined before. It was determined, like in this case, afterwards. So how do you sell this kind of software? You still have to position it. You still need unique features that are valuable to the user. And here's one of the keys that they're willing to pay for. And I'll give you an example of one that they won't pay for in just a second. Through homework, here's what we found. We found that we were better at cross-development than between Windows and other platforms. The reason is because you could take something in CodeWarrior for Mac, and you could take that code and bring it right in as a file into CodeWarrior for Windows, and a CodeWarrior for Linux, and CodeWarrior for Nintendo. So if you're developing games or other applications for multiple platforms, we had a strong advantage, sometimes up to 80% faster development time. So was that an advantage? Yes. Is it something Microsoft couldn't do? No way. They'd have to develop 57 other development tools to compete with that. So here's how we leveraged it. So we just decided we have some fun with this. Our graphic was look good on multiple platforms. So again, that was the strongest strength of this product. Now we're also faster and had unique characteristics, from our ability to compile. We can compile dramatically faster, sometimes 3, 4, 7 times faster. But we thought our strongest single positioning was multiple platform development. And so this here shows how we actually execute it. So the positioning, the lessons on this right here is position before whenever possible. Me Too positioning isn't effective. The key in this particular example is that we leveraged our family of products to create the best positioning. Now sometimes on family of products, if you go back and look at the Alliance presentation that I gave recently, you'll see that sometimes your family of products is the other products that you work together with. So leveraging that. Much like the iPhone leverages against the Android, the fact that they have more developers that support their platform. So that's part of their positioning. Is like they say, there's an app for that. Okay, the next one over here that I'm going to show is positioning at DCA. Here I was, the 5th largest software company, and I was co-heading up the channels. And we inherited a product through an acquisition called Crossfax. Now, in the previous consulting and launch company, I had launched several versions of WinFax and GammaFax and other products, so I certainly knew the category. And so here I had this product, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's worse than a Me Too. It's feature poor. It had probably 10% of the features of WinFax. And yet I had to try to sell this product and build a channel out of it. So things that we can consider as product features, which you have to do a comprehensive comparative matrix. Pricing. A lot of times you've got to look at the terms, not just the initial price. Certainly for enterprise application and SaaS applications give you terms, which is one of the reasons that make them somewhat easier to sell as a big ticket item. Distribution, supply chain, and then promotion. So these are variables that you have to look at. But the thing is, you must see the positioning strategy. So let me give you a scenario of what happened. Chrysler wanted to broadcast fax their brochure to local dealers. And when the sales rep told me about that, I was like, oh my goodness, they're going to broadcast with WinFax? And they want to broadcast an actual picture of a car? And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. So although we didn't have all the features, we were strong in broadcasting. And we also did grayscale, and WinFax did not. So look at the first piece I put together. I went downstairs in the cafeteria, and actually, that's the next example. This particular one is I faxed myself. I scanned in a picture of one of their cars, I scanned it to myself using Crossfax. I scanned it to myself doing WinFax, pasted both of those, made a photocopy, scanned that in, sort of, it wasn't quite so digital back then, and then I emailed it over. And this is what the car looked like without grayscale. This is what, there was no way they were going to be able to use it, WinFax, without grayscale. And then you come over here and you look at ours, and it looked like an HP LaserJet. Why? Because we OEM the HP LaserJet driver to get grayscale. Then here's the other one. They had a lot more features, so I said, well, it doesn't really matter if you've got everything, including the kitchen sink, if the sink leaks. And then I quoted over here, because they certainly beat us so far as features, I quoted over here, WinFax has a lot of great features, but it consistently crashes when trying to broadcast fax. In fact, we've never gotten more than 50 out at a time. This is invariably due to a memory leak that has never been fixed. I quoted PC Magazine. So did it work? Yes. They purchased Crossfax. 20,000 users. That was more sales of Crossfax than I expected to sell the entire year. So the key on this is that you have to find a marketing hook. So the takeaway on this one, it's best to find out, what prospects want in advance so you can build it into the product. But if you don't and you have a couple unique differentiators, you can still work with this. So this is the lesson. Do you need all the features of a competitor to win? No. And in product development, a lot of times I tell sales and the channel, you guys, sell what we've got. If we've got good positioning, we will still beat the market. Not in every aspect, but if you divide the market into 3 parts and you're the best, like in this case, for broadcast faxing, color, or black and white documents, then you will dominate them every single time. So you can deposition or crush a competitor if you can find something unique that the prospect values and the competitors are missing. And that's sometimes where you have to do your homework, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Here's another example. One of the companies I was working with, they made an application that did backup. Now they competed really against backup tape drives, but their software did backup to hard drives. And so they had bits and bytes and all these different analogies as to trying to convince people they were getting little to no traction. And so when I went into this, I started this exercise by asking, well, how many emails do people actually get in a day? And what are some of the issues? And so, from this I was able to come up with this analogy, and this became the Holy Grail. So look at this. They're mandated, especially public companies, mandated by law to store it. Post Enron, this $50 million case that I pulled up because they didn't maintain and store their emails. Okay, so the current solution, industry standard, back it up every 24 hours. So let's take a look at this. 81 emails received daily that are non-spam. Assume a quarter of importance. So we can, 81 is like, yeah, I would get a couple hundred emails. With Chanimal, sometimes I get 300-400 emails a day. Okay, so I believe that, but let's break it down to just 20 because everyone can believe 20. So if you've got 20 emails a day times 500 people per server, which is what Microsoft recommends is on their Exchange server, that's 10,000 lost emails between backups. And then another quote that Microsoft even mentioned, if your backup fails 42% of the time fail, or Exchange database is corrupted, 72% have had an Exchange disaster, then you're losing a truckload of emails, even if you go to your previous backup. So what's the next phrase out of your mouth after you tell your CEO, I just lost 10,000 emails? Would you like fries with that? Because he's talking to you about outside employment opportunities. It's really funny. At a trade show, I went and I spoke with a guy, and he says, yeah, I just started a new job. And I said, why'd you lose the last one? And his face went a little red. He says, well, our database went down, and I lost tens of thousands of emails, and they fired me. So this is the way we leverage that. So here's the option. Continuous data backup with Lucid 8's DigiVault. You lose 1 to 4 minutes of email, not 24 hours. Plus it takes approximately 20 minutes, not 3 to 5 hours, to restore it. You tell everybody, hey guys, we're down. We'll be back up in about 20 minutes versus go home for the rest of the day. We're out of business. So it's similar cost, negligible loss, much faster restoration. So which would you rather tell your CEO? I lost 10,000 emails or 17? Which would tend toward long-term job security? And that was the positioning, job security. It wasn't the technical bits and bytes like they were trying before. It was job security. We also depositioned not just a couple of the tape drive manufacturers, we depositioned everybody. So what we did is we showed them that the industry best practice was actually the worst practice for job security. We crushed dozens of competitors in one pass. The key is we had to get creative. So look at the positioning on this. This is not product. This is, again, job security. It's how we leveraged the information that we knew. Now I'm talking about this term depositioning. So what does this mean? So it means you mention your strengths against your competitors. So it's not that your product is so good. It's just compared to those other losers, we're better. So here's a synopsis. Code Warrior were the best for cross-platform. CrossFax looked much better against WinFax. Not on its own. You look at that matrix, it looks pretty pathetic. But against WinFax, with those two features that are critical, it looked very good. And Digivault looked better than all of the tape backup options. So again, it's the old thing that I think Romney tried to do it, but I think Clinton did it better back in the old days. It's the product, stupid. So, or in this case, back then it was the economy, stupid. Okay, so here's how you deposition the competition. A comparative matrix, I call it a Tom Cruise chart, meaning Jeff or Kevin, you're better than Tom Cruise because you live in Dallas. And Robert, you're better than Tom Cruise because you live in Paris, France. So all of this is completely irrelevant to Tom Cruise fans, but you look really good on paper. Positioning grids, we've seen the Gartner Magic Quadrant. I'll show you some additional ones. Also, we associate them with negative imaging. A perfect example of this was when the Intel had that rounding error, and AMD would joke, Intel Inside, what does that mean? It's a warning label. Or Salesforce.com, when they ran this ad with the Dalai Lama, but they forgot to get permission of Dalai Lama. So one of their competitors pointed it out, and they had to pull the entire campaign, which is a good way to sort of, again, confound your competitors. And then the HRW. Here I was in the textbook market, and one of our competitors had hundreds of errors in their English textbook. Well, the state of Texas would charge them $10,000 per error. And so if we can point that out to them, then we could take them out of business before they even started in the state. And that's exactly what we did. We did a test on one side. It says, please, and we put this in the mailboxes of all these teachers. And on one side it said, please grade this test. There are 10 questions. So all they did is found errors. Then they opened up a part that was perforated, opened up the other side, and it says, congratulations, you've just graded like Prentice Hall's new textbook. And then it sort of made the rest of the statement. So again, this is capitalizing on their mistakes as we move forward. So again, sometimes your best positioning is the weakness of the competition. Again, you're not that good, you're just better than them. It's the old adage, you don't have to be faster than, if you and another guy are racing, you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than the next guy. Now the key on this is you always want to make sure that you're honest, but this is war. And your job is to make sure your product is successful and all the people that depend on you have job security. And that's the job of the other guy. If you do a job better, then you can hire them. So always stay nice to your competitors for when you take them out of business. Okay, here's the comparative matrix example. Again, that Tom Cruise chart. Here's an example of like a positioning grid. And so I'll give you an example of this positioning grid. This was in the telco cable industry, when the telcos realized that the cable industry was going and providing voice over IP phones through the cable. And so they better start competing with them head-to-head with services. So they then had to start providing digital television. Okay, the problem is, as they worked through the model, digital television alone was not enough to pay for building out their entire network. So you come over here and you realized that the real problem here, why a lot of these telcos were not deploying, is that they could not provide enough revenue to pay for the build out. And so here I was at Motorola, and here we were trying to position the set-top box that was sitting at $800. Competition was selling at $200. Our cost would drop once we could actually get some traction. But to start with, that was incredibly expensive. How are we going to sell this in? Well, all that really matters to the telco was how much revenue they're going to make, not how much it costs for every aspect of the network. If we can save money in one place and we had to make it up by having a set top that costs more money, all said and done, all that mattered is from end to end, they need to be within a certain price range. So we struggled with this until I hired an MBA intern to work on the business model. As we went through the business model, it became very clear what our positioning was. We were the only set-top box in the market that could provide all these extra services. And so when you looked at the total number of services that our competitors could provide, it was $59, but our business model showed that they had to make at least $79 for their business model to work. And yet we could provide up to $129. So what happened on this? We became the only set-top box in the entire market that would make their business model work. And if the business model didn't work, it didn't matter how cheap the other products was. It's like you paid just a little too little, not quite enough. I give an example, for example, of a car that's got 3 wheels. There are times when you don't quite pay enough. So I'm going to sell you a Camry. I'm going to sell it to you for $1,000 with 3 wheels. Now it'll cost you $25,000 if you get it with 4, but $1,000 with 3. And someone says, "Well, that's great, but what if I want to turn?" I said, "Well, then don't turn." Okay, that's essentially like those other set-top boxes. They just didn't quite have enough horsepower to get the job done to actually make you any money. So how much were you going to make with that? Were you going to lose $20 every month forever with the other set-top boxes? Or with ours, you can actually make a business model and compete and not lose your shirt to cable. So I positioned it also as the Camry, against competitors like Pace and Samsung and NEC, and I call them the Yugo. And you know why you call it Yugo? Because you go alongside that car pushing it. So that's the kind of car, just like their set-tops, it's great to test your network, but I wouldn't want to send my daughter across country to college in one. So this is how we started to articulate it. The lessons learned: positioning was not the product, it was the business model. We took out every competitor did not make their business model work, which meant we took out every single one, dominated with over 92% market share, and garnered a $1.3 billion deal with British Telecom. So that's positioning. Okay, and that was with the most expensive product, 4 times more expensive than the average set-top box. Okay, here's another example. Okay, this is a company that made products that would actually reduce the scratches from CDs and DVDs. It was called Scratch Out. They're going into a crowded market up against Maxell, Memorex versus a company no one had ever heard of. So here's ways that we did this. One is, for example, a lot of those, like Memorex and Maxell, they use chemical softeners. Okay, theoretically, they could actually melt the plastic and smooth it out, sort of like an ice skating rink, where you can fill in the gaps if you heat up the ice. Unfortunately, it didn't work. If they actually put enough acetone in it to work, it would melt the CD or the DVD. So what it really was a very good cleaner, but a majority of the online reviews were very negative, which is not good for a consumer product that you're relying on lots, like bread, lots of bread. You make 50 cents off the bread, you better sell a lot of bread to keep the doors open. Or what we did is we positioned those instead of like chemical as chemical softeners. And then the polishers that would polish your disc, we call those mechanical grinders. And so Skip Doctor was the most popular one. But the thing is, it worked for minor scratches, but deep scratches it wouldn't repair at all. It even had disclaimers on the labels. So our product could take that out in seconds, and so I'll show you different ways that we depositioned that. So our product was 100% playable 100% of the time. We actually didn't clean the big grooves. What we did is we cleaned the microscopic grooves inside of the big grooves that were causing the problems. We'd polish those out, and so it would go right back up again. And it would read positively versus what it was doing with the other products. They would actually have to take the mountains all the way down, which means by the time you're really through, you end up with a floppy disk, not a CD or DVD. So again, this is the way that we articulated the advantages. And we're also the price performance leader. And our product actually worked. So here's how we put it together in a PowerPoint that we compared this in a comparative matrix. So sure, we're going to give them credit, but we're going to also push them way over here. So we had a new approach, completely unique microscopic polish. Guaranteed 100% playable 100% of the time. If it can be fixed, meaning it's not physically cracked, we can fix it. We're the only product to repair light and severe scratches. Why? Because we didn't have to polish them all the way down. We just had to polish the ridges on the inside. We're optimized for impulse buying, undisputed price performance leader, and how did it do? Well, it did very well. I'll give you the synopsis in a second, but sometimes we would run up head to head. So we would try to take the entire market out, but we would actually have to go up against the skip doctors. So what we did is we used an analogy, another way to deposition the competition. So for example, in their case, it's like getting a ketchup stain on your shirt. And in their case, you'd have to wash that shirt like 10 times just to get it clean. Why not just rub a little scratch out right on the stain, throw it in one time, and you're done? A lot less time, a lot less wear on your shirts. So this is how we took them out. The softeners, again, only works if a minor scratch, if at all. Does more to clean the disc, does not repair. Very, very bad online reviews. And of course, we would pop all those reviews up. It's like, I'm bringing it back. I've been ripped off. Things like that. Few return purchases, bad for a consumable. It's old technology, old approach, poor results. So see, we just put this old bottle of acetone up there and completely depositioned them. So who bought it first? The buyers. What's the result? So we came in as the best performance for the best price. Why? We didn't have, it wasn't very expensive for a tube versus a complete grinder. We depositioned the alternatives old school. It's the wrong technology. We leveraged the strengths, and in this case, the strengths were actually built into the product in advance. It was positioned before it was created. And then we just leveraged that positioning, and we crushed the competition. Okay, so as I mentioned, some of your tools: comparative matrix, positioning quadrants, these Venn diagrams with the circles. These help visualize the strength for our position. I'll show you what I mean by that. From this, that we then create the 3 to 5 key differentiators. So here's your exercise. Okay, step 1, you've got to do a comparative matrix of your product. Of all the companies I consult with, and right now it's probably over 279, most of these companies are very even when they're very good at telling about their product until the customer says, well, how does it compare to the competition? And then they list a specific competition, and then the company sits there with a deer in the headlight look. So when you create this, you want to create an internal one versus external. So the internal one shows your strengths and your weaknesses, because you've also got to know their positioning or their potential positioning, whether they leverage it or not. Second is you have to know the areas where you're very weak in, and then you've got to come up with the dialogues to move around that, or you get out of dodge. If you're a CRM application and your application sells for $2,000 a seat, and you're going up against someone who's going for $49 a seat, but it's highly specialized, you better stay in your specialized market, because you're just not going to compete against the other guys. Okay, also when you do your comparative matrix, you want to cover the pricing, the distribution. So for example, sometimes you can beat the competition because they don't have distribution. You can beat them on features. Sometimes you beat them on support. The old days, WordPerfect came in and dominated the market, everybody, because they offered unheard of free tech support. Anything that might differentiate. And then you format so the competition looks like there's a sea of red. So this actually looks like one of my sons. He's not the tallest kid in this class, up against some of the competition, but it doesn't matter. If you can leverage it, if you can know how to twist this guy around, you can still beat him out. This is a product over here showing what it would look like in a PowerPoint. So if they want to see this and read this in details, I don't really care. I just want to show a sea of red. So if you were to look at the internal one, you might have a lot of red in yours, but that's not your job to point out your weaknesses. It's your job to point out your strength. It's competition. What's amazing is most of the time when people are making big purchases, they create these kind of grids, sometimes on a scratch paper, sometimes in a spreadsheet, and then their own companies that they're comparing it against don't even have a clue. That's a travesty when your customer knows more about your entire market space than you do. So again, this is what it would look like, and this is how you would leverage it. Everybody's got some strengths. The key is to know how to leverage it. The next thing is over here in a positioning quadrant. This is where you can really body slam the competition. Over here is an example of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So we see Gartner does this as an industry analyst constantly, and this is their special quadrant that's copyrighted and everything else. But what they're really doing is they're sort of putting things in different perspectives and moving it around. So I'll give you an example of that. Here's your exercise from the quadrant. I've got that grid that you saw. Just print 5 copies of it. Plot the variables from the competitive matrix. So remember, you do your competitive matrix first. Okay, then you've got all these things where you're strong. Well, which of those are the strongest? See, that's positioning. Where are you the farthest away from the competition in an area that the market values? And then you put your product on the top right. The reason is because they're used to sort of the top right is the leader category. Okay, and you position your competitors as many as you can in the bottom left. So the further you are from your competitors, the stronger your positioning. The caveat, if the prospect values those variables. And here's an example. One of the companies I was working with had a go-to-meeting competitive product. Their advantage, as they pointed out, was their 256-bit encryption. And I looked at that thinking, it's like, okay, that's your holy grail, is your 256-bit encryption. They said, yeah, we're more secure than anybody else. Well, a lot of the webinars, I'd say most of them are probably given by salespeople or people that are trying to present to the world. They want everyone to log in that they can. There's only a few groups that don't want people to log in. So I said, look, your major market for this is drug dealers and terrorists. And so I said, it'd be better for you to give the product away to that clientele and then sell your product for for $10-20 million per lead to the government who wants to know who these terrorists are. Okay, so it's not just that you have something that's unique, it's something unique that the market values. Okay, so here's that same tire application that I showed you the comparative matrix. So look at theirs. So what we did is we created all kinds of different variables. Here's cost, here's speed, here's maybe platform Windows versus Linux. You just have to take your comparative matrix, start plotting them back and forth until you see this kind of a pattern. When you see this pattern, you can visualize where you're the strongest. So in this particular case, they were the fastest to implement. Why? They were a SaaS application. They're also one of the most affordable, certainly on a short-term basis and even on a long-term basis versus their competition. So this here shows how you can visualize that. So again, take the competitors down to the mat. And this is ways that you use the comparative matrix and leverage it. Now here's an example of how to do it wrong. You put your company down here in the bottom right. No, people are familiar with the Gartner approach. They've sort of set a standard for that. So put yourself in the top right, like this one. Okay, now this is someone where they're actually trying to position against alternatives. So how many people in this group, without a raise of hands because I can't see them, how many people in this group compete against spreadsheets, compete against nothing, compete against a Word document, compete against Outlook, something that's free? Okay, so sometimes what you have to do is you have to take all of the competitors. This was learning application stuff. This was like online help on steroids. It'd be like the kind of help you get inside of TurboTax. So you get not only program help, but tax help. So process help and software help. So that's the kind of help that they made. So again, here's online help. Here's their whole category. Okay, here's the other options that people use to train people on. So they had to sort of map and overlap all of those to sort of show prospects where they're different to help them to visualize it. And then of course this is the first stage, is to separate themselves from the potential alternatives, and then within their category then they do a comparative matrix and so forth. So they have to split themselves out. So this over here is one where here were some competitors, and one of their value propositions is that they were the most complete. Easy to use because the SaaS application, most complete because when you saw this, you saw that the competition had gaps, individual ones, and all of them as a row, none of them to tracking. So when you look at everything that has to be done to track the tires from left to right, this shows the problem. By the way, for you and I that have cars that we buy a set of tires every 3-4 years, it's not a big deal. But when you look at the state of Texas that might have 100,000 vehicles, they might have millions and millions of dollars tied up into tires in current inventory. For them, if they could save 20% with this application, it was worth a lot to them. So again, this is not for you and I. They have to target that particular market, and that's part of their positioning. Okay, so here's the next exercise. You determine your top 3 to 5 best position variables, and you list them. And so on those grids that you created, where you're way apart from the other variables, you then start to create that. Okay, you're the fastest. You are the most secure. So you find the variables that you're the strongest in. You list at least 3 to 5 of those variables. And then what you do is you back it up. You prove it with your features underneath it. I'll give you an example of that. Because these features will validate your positioning. Remember, you're making a proof case. This is a rock solid argument. It's called persuasive format, and it's part of your persuasive argument to make the case. This is why they'd be a fool not to consider you unless they're already a fool, in which case you can't, reason with them. Maybe they're on drugs. Okay, so here's some analogies that put the competition in perspective. So with Motorola, I showed you that one. It's the Hyundai versus the Camry. It's the you push it car versus the car that actually works. It's the Lucid A analogy. You want fries with that? It's the project management, like little dog versus horse, and I'll give you that example in just a minute. Okay, I want to also show you some ways to position this. Sometimes you look at the overall market and it's really difficult. I'll show you project management as an example. I'll also show you something else as an example. This particular example, this is a company that makes software that helps you to manage the inventory inside of a jewelry store. Well, one of their options is nothing. Manual, people counting their inventory. The other one is barcode. Someone's got a barcode reader, as though they really need a barcode reader for jewelry. I mean, how many pieces of jewelry do they blow out the door? This is not Walmart. Okay, so the advantage of a barcode is speed. It's certainly not security. And the reason why they had a security is because the average place lost a lot of inventory every year, surprisingly, from internal theft from employees. Okay, and the manual over here, inventory management. So again, this here shows the advantage. Perceived security, fixed RFID, meaning if you put something that they have it and there's like monitors all over the whole store, they leave the store with it and the whole place turns red. That's fixed RFID. Mobile RFID is which you put a little tag on the unit and you don't have big monitors all over the place to test it. What you do is you just have a little hand scanner. You can scan it right over the top of the glass, and it tells you where all your inventory is. The advantage of that is you can actually count your inventory every day. It takes maybe 10 minutes to count your inventory. Well, the thieves inside of the jewelry stores are expecting most companies, because it's so time consuming, to count their inventory every 6 months to a year. So if they steal it right after somebody's counted their inventory, they could leave that company and be gone for 5 months before they get caught. And that's quite literally what was happening. But this is such a deterrent that they know that every day their system is going to detect if something's gone, and they were the only person on, that was at the store yesterday. It's pretty much a gimme who stole it. And so here's fast and accurate. Well, fixed is going to be more accurate because you just press the button. It shows everything is there. Mobile is certainly faster than manual, and manual is actually faster than barcoding because you can look at the box and say there's 10, it's full, move on. Versus barcoding, you got to take everything out and check the barcode. And inventory management and so forth. But I wanted to show you that. So the first thing you do is you have to kill the alternatives. This one's killing manual and barcoding. The second one is, now we've killed those two, but we haven't killed fixed RFID. So how do we kill them? Well, let's look over here. Mobile RFID is 90% of the market. Unless you got the Hope Diamond, you really don't need this because it's too high priced. Besides, you look at the other example over here. Fixed RFID, again, it protects 100% of the time, but so does mobile RFID. As a matter of fact, they have zero shrinkage. In 2.3 million items tagged, they have yet to lose a single item because the deterrent is what stops it. So your wall save is not as safe as Fort Knox, but then again, you don't need to pay that kind of money to get an armored car to bring it to the airport, to fly it in with Air Force One to Fort Knox every day, and then bring it back every morning. I mean, that's exactly what fixed RFID is doing. So you can see over here that what we did is we took out fixed RFID. Is it better? Theoretically. But if it protects 100% of the time, they both protect the 100% of the time, then why are you dealing with that? Okay, so now let's look at another example of an analogy. Because again, sometimes sometimes you've got this, or you've got it, but you've got to articulate it. So it's the analogies where the rubber hits the road. So here's basic project management. If I get another company contact me saying that I need some help with my project management, I'm probably just going to roll up in the corner and rock myself, because there's like 219 competitors in the category. Okay, so that's not a cool thing when you've got that many competitors. So how is your little product going to compete against 219 players? Well, what you do is you split the market out first. So you take everybody over here and you compare them to Notepad versus MS Word. Sure, you can do your word processing in it, but you're going to have grammatical errors and spelling errors, and it's going to be a pain. Okay, or a Chihuahua against a horse. So no matter how much you dress that dog, it's still a dog. And enterprise needs more horsepower. So the first thing you did is you split it out. So you parsed or broke the market out into a different segment. And then you've narrowed it down to, let's say, 3 top competitors. And so now you only have to make fun of 3 competitors instead of 219. And so it's old legacy interfaces, steep learning curves, usability problems, horror stories of 6-month installs. You can see where we're going here. Job security. It's another one of those job security positioning value propositions. You're going to get this, and they're going to kill you if it takes you 6 months to install this. And wait till they get the bill. This is price gouging, not a good normal margin. It's outrageous. So essentially, you're going to be able to say, we can do everything that the old dead horse can do. We just do it a whole lot better, and we charge a competitive price for regular enterprise software, not for their stuff, which is off the charts expensive. So see how that analogy there? This helps you to deposition your competitor, and you look a whole lot better in that light. Okay, here's another example of positioning, and this is what I mean by now you have to start to articulate your positioning. So look at this one here. I'm going to make a bold statement. Microsoft Word is the #1 best-selling word processor. Okay, but so I'm saying it's the #1 best-selling. Notice because I'm going after the pole position. It's a travesty if you've got the pole position not to leverage it. But now I'm going to explain why. #1, it's the industry standard. Well, there's a lot of other word processors, like even Microsoft, or excuse me, WordPerfect for Windows is still better than Microsoft Word in my opinion. Try the spell checker, and you'll see that it's actually looks up alternative words versus just say no match found. So, but there's a lot to say for an industry standard. Next thing, helps you to write quicker. Okay, so how does it help you to write quicker? Well, what you do is you list the feature down. So let's say the ability to edit electronically versus your typewriter part of the eraser. So you list the feature, and here's how you write the feature benefit copy to make sure this works. List the feature name, describe it, tell the benefit. So here's an example. Here's an example of how it helps you to write better. Spell checker compares your word to a 50,000 word dictionary, ensures you never misspell another word, or as I say, helps you to look like less of a fool. Thesaurus. Okay, so on that one you list the feature, give the feature name, you describe it, and then you tell the benefit. So again, it does you no good to learn how to position your product if you can't then articulate it. So this is right down to the nitty-gritty of how you take it from your positioning, your strength, the #1 best-selling word processor, and then how you leverage that and even throw in additional things that help you do better against the alternatives. Okay, let's look at another example. This is someone that they were trying to take an entire industry, an entire way of doing things, and get people to switch. So the real issue is emails. And that's because there's a lot of lawsuits over a lot of emails. There's some CEOs that have actually gone to jail in those nice pretty orange suits because they did not capture their email, or they lost it. Yet there are times when email actually has problems. So you can see on this one right here, this is an alternative to actual email. So how are they going to do this? So emails has problems. It's not always the best way to communicate. Sometimes it's the worst. We've all sat there and tried to compose. We can go talk to somebody and it takes 2 minutes. We write an email, we're 20 minutes trying to make sure that we're politically correct, or that it's going to not come back and make us lose our job. It has a high productivity and IT cost. Why? Because again, all the cover your tail end that's involved in writing those emails, and also the amount of time that it takes to go through all your emails and classify them as spam, save, keep, and IT cost. Most people don't realize how much server space and resources it starts to take with. It also carries a potential legal and litigation risk. So you've really got to pull out the problems in the industry before you can position yourself to solve them. So here's their problem. Most of the advantages of verbal conversation, but much more convenient. It reduces the growing expense of email, and it minimizes the risk of high cost miscommunication litigation. So what we did is we positioned VaporStream as electronic conversation. It's got all the benefits of a conversation, and it doesn't have the negatives of email. Why? Because it vaporizes. You send it, they've got, let's say, so many minutes when it's on the screen to read it, just like a conversation. It's all real time. Then it disappears. There's no trail. It sits in memory. So as a result, it doesn't have the same regulation that email has, and it's just like a conversation you might have at lunch. What are you going to do? Have people go out and bring a tape recorder with them to record everything? That's absurd. You don't have to record everything. So why do we do it electronically? It gets people in trouble when they want to have, let's say they've got a crisis. They've got to be able to deal with that, and they don't want it to become public. Doesn't mean they're trying to kill everybody. They're just trying to make sure that they don't lose the entire company in the process of trying to fix the mistake, which will fix the problem anyway. Okay, so here's the validation. You must prove it. You make a claim, prove it. So you list 3 validations for your company, or in this case, list 3 validations for your product. Validate with the features and benefits that make your product unique, and make your prospects want to buy it. Again, they'd be a fool not to buy it after this. So here's the deliverables. A competitive matrix. So start your process on this with a comparative matrix so you get a real juicy idea of what you're up against. Then create a little Venn diagram. Take your little matrix and take a couple of the different variables and keep moving them around until you find the areas where you're the farthest from the competition. And then once you've got those, you've got to articulate. So one of the easiest ways to articulate is with analogies. Again, a chihuahua against a horse. And then a horse against a dead horse. So each of those, one analogy just goes on the next one. Or using additional type of analogies like the Camry against the Yugo. So you deposition them by associating them with something negative. And then you support it with top 3 supporting statements. And then you start the persuasive document, which is the foundation document for everything else. If you go to the Chanimal website, you're going to see under resources, there's a section under Marcom for marketing communications called copywriting. There I list the persuasive document and instructions on how to create it, even the process, step 1, step 2, step 3, on how to create this, including going right back to the comparative matrix. There's also a document there on how to create a comparative matrix. But of course, everyone who's attended this, I'll send you guys an email with these documents attached, along with a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so at this point, we're down to questions. This is being recorded, so I'm going to stop the recording, go with the questions, and then I will answer all the questions, not verbally, because we've got a lot of people online right now, and so it's going to sound like we're in a mall. So I'm going to take them all electronically. So for everyone that is just watching this video, this is about to conclude. For everyone that is not watching the video, then go ahead and stick around, and I'll answer your questions. Thank you very much.